Hello and welcome to the GC+CISO Connection Show. I'm your host, Shawn Tuma. I'm very excited to be here today recording our first episode of this show, where our goal is to bring on leading industry experts in the legal and the security community to help share their insights and perspectives on how legal teams and security teams within organizations can better work together. This is a very important mission because these two units really are the key defenders in the organization. And for my very first guest on the show, I'm very privileged to have my good friend, Dena Stroh. Dena is General Counsel with the North Texas Tollway Authority, and Dena is a longtime friend. We've worked together on many things, and she's put up with my antics in many ways, including today. And Dena also had a very instrumental role in how we're here today in the bringing about this show. And so we'll get to that in a few minutes. But first, I want to ask Dena to introduce herself and give us a little bit of your background and your experience in the industry.
Well, first, Shawn, thank you for having me. I love being your inaugural guest. It's fantastic. I really enjoy getting to talk to you about this important topic. So I have been a general counsel now for 12 years. And when I started going in-house at first an oil and gas company, I've been at NTTA for about 10 years. I remember reading an article saying your head of IT was your best friend. I knew this right away. So a dozen years ago, I knew that I needed to ensure that I had a great relationship with my IT. And being in-house for a dozen years, I've had a great opportunity to work both as a solo GC and as well as with a larger team that included working with my IT folks both places. Yeah. And IT, as you know, and I know you're going to get to this, could be the CISO, it could be IT, it could be CIO, it could be CTO, it could be any of the names that it might be, but generally, I'm going to call them IT.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, Dena, because one of the challenges that we run into in this, in ironically, both legal and security and IT, is we get hung up on names and definitions, and we all love to have our own little languages, and it makes us feel so special. But that gets in the way of communication and collaboration many times. And so having that understanding is more important than what we term something, how we phrase it. So I think that's important. But there's something else I wanted to touch on, because you and I were co-chairs for the Texas Bar's Advanced In-House Counsel Conference. And in a very fortuitous turn of events, you had a suggestion for a topic.
Turns out I had a suggestion for this topic. So let me tell you about that. As I kind of alluded to, I've worked closely with my IT for a long time, and one of my favorites, she was my head of IT a couple years ago at NTTA. She has since moved on to a great and wonderful company, but she had asked me to be on a panel on the security side, so on the IT side, about working together. And so when we're coming up with topics, as you know, for in-house counsel, we made the decision to go with this topic of the connection between the general counsel and IT. And then I volunteered to be your panelist. So not only did we come up with a topic, have the topic, we get to do this together now twice.
Yeah. I mean, and it really was, Dena, it was that conversation that helped me. Like I'm very involved. I'm an attorney, but I'm very involved in the security community. And when I'm meeting with CISOs or when I'm at their events and I'm speaking with them, one of the things I see is you have two main groups. You have those that work well with their legal department, and you have those that don't. And many of those that don't want to, but they don't know how to. They feel like there's a disconnect between them and legal, and they don't know how to get to them or whatnot. And so that was the theme I'd been hearing with them. And then when you suggested this topic, I mean, it was like, wait a minute, wow, this is, I'm now hearing it from two different directions. And so, you were very gracious and did not have this over-controlling notion of what our article should look like for the conference.
I was just glad you wrote it. Let's be honest here.
And so the idea of the article for the conference really was me thinking, well, what the heck? If you're going to write an article, write a book. And that's how we got this book.
So I might have cheated on loving my IT people. You know this, right? That I coded when I was a kid and did coding competitions. True story.
No,
True story.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you certainly understand how to speak that language.
Well, let's be honest. I've gone to law school as well. So I know a little bit about the people that would go into IT because I guess for a while there I was one.
And you that's an interesting perspective because one of the things that I see is the role of personalities in how well sometimes IT leaders can move out of just the IT role more into that business role. And having an understanding of those personalities, I think, is really important. And so your background with that, I think brings a very good perspective.
I won competitions, if you can believe it. It's true. And haven't coded in, 30 years.
So what were you coding?
Whatever they made you code. I mean, you're programming Pascal. This is a long time ago.
So
I was programming, well, first in BASIC and then in Pascal. And you go to the competitions with a giant computer, a tiny little screen, and you're doing what they tell you to do, as many programs as you can make in the amount of time.
Well, see, now it all makes sense.
Now it all makes sense.
Now it just all fits together because the most experience I have in formal training or education for my role is I took a WordPerfect class in college.
That's
I was
hilarious.
a history political science major.
WordPerfect.
I
love WordPerfect.
How to use WordPerfect. I mean, remember
still.
the challenges back in the day.
Now called Dinosaur.
Yeah, and so are we. If we
You're not
use
wrong.
WordPerfect.
You're not wrong.
So one of our challenges is lawyers speak a language, IT people speak a language, and sometimes that creates a misunderstanding between us and within the business as well. What have you seen is helpful in that? What have you seen works well with people you've worked with? And I ask you that not just who you work with now, right? Because you've done this for a long time, just throughout your experience.
Yeah, I think it's the human component is real. That getting to know your legal team, if you can. So I've been real fortunate. The teams that I've worked with, I've had access to them. Sometimes you've got a lot of hierarchy in organizations, and how do you break down that hierarchy? Sometimes it's a personal relationship. I'll tell you, when I met who's effectively my CISO or handles with the information security where I am now, it happened to be the Friday before Memorial Day where I was at work late and I've run across the only other person who was at work late, and it happened to be the guy who's my information security guy. This is how I met him. So there's a little bit of luck and fortuity, don't get me wrong. But we made that instant connection that we started talking about how he got cyber insurance to a certain amount. I said, we need more. He said, okay, but I just got them to this amount. That's great. Let's work together. And from that conversation, I talked to my boss, the CEO, about, well, we need to elevate this at our organization. We need this to be at the board level. And he's like, no, it can just be a committee internally. And then he looked it up and he's like, you're right. We need this at the board level. And so it's a process. You have to start somewhere. You have to meet the people. You got to get to know the people. And I'd also say, I'm just putting it out there, don't be afraid of legal. For the most part, we're really nice people. Yeah. I promise. We can be a little scary in our titles. I get it. But we want to do the right thing. We want to help. We want to get you to where you need to be. And so if you can get over that little bit of like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to legal, that's fine. We're people too.
Well, exactly, Dena. And there's so much important stuff in what you just said there. I want to unpack some of it. Number one, the fact that it was a fortuitous meeting, right? And that's something that I think we want to encourage our listeners to be more intentional on. Get out, get to know each other, start a conversation. And in fact, that's the whole point really of this book, is to get 2 copies and take one and give it to either your legal counterpart or your security counterpart and start a conversation. And that conversation may be, this guy's an idiot and he has no idea what he's talking about.
It's not true. Shawn knows what he's talking about.
But if that starts the conversation, then our job is done, right? Because you're starting the conversation and you have a basis for a dialogue like you have. And then you mentioned cyber insurance.
Mm-hmm.
That is such a critically important issue. And it's my opinion that both legal and security need to be involved in that.
And I'll tell you, for those either on the legal side or the information security side who don't know as much about the insurance side, I'll tell you, there's a lot of things that you need to get to know, I'll say. I think that cyber insurance, one of the benefits of cyber insurance is, to be honest, the cyber insurance companies, they see a lot of breaches across the country, across the world. They know what's going on. So these questions that you get from cyber insurance, you think, oh my gosh, what is the answer to this? What should the answer to this be? But the reality is it's educating you of what you need to be doing for the next year if you haven't done it already. So it is an area I think that's really important. I'll also add on the legal side, the case law is constantly changing. And so the risks are constantly changing on who should something report to. Say you've got a breach situation, you have an incident. Should it be a legal contract? Should it come out of my department? My money, my department, that way legal controls it, that comes with attorney-client privilege. That's something maybe the information security folks, they don't even think about it. But that's something I think about, and that's why it's great to have a conversation.
It really is. And, one of the challenges is the nature of both legal and security people. We're both protectors in our role.
I like that.
Risk.
I'm a protector, Shawn.
You're the protectors of the organization. You're
true.
protecting it from all risk in legal, and security is protecting it from pretty much all risk these days too, in that way. But having a protective nature means sometimes you're not a marketing person where it's all butterflies and rainbows. Like it's serious. And so to those personalities, like you said, legal may seem a little bit rigid or off-putting or whatever, but so does security. And you have that alignment together in that way, and your job is to stop bad things from happening. And that creates that nature. So embrace that together and align yourselves. But the other thing that I want to mention that you said is a lot of CISOs bristled at the idea of an insurance company telling them what they had to do. And what I've told them is these are things you've been asking to do for 5 years. Now you've got support.
You've got a reason for it. No, I like that. I'm going to go back to something that you had said. So I think everyone heard that he gives 2 of these books out.
That's right.
So if you don't have an interaction with your information security folks, what a great way to meet them. Hey, here's a book. Let's read it together. Let's talk about it. I love this idea.
I mean, book club would be fun, right? Let's have the book club.
Book club for IT and legal. I love it.
Yeah, and that's also one of the things that I want to do, with this show is have on. I mean, you and I were the initial kind of presentation on this issue, but in the future, I'd like to have on legal and security counterparts to talk about their relationship, much like you're sharing your experiences.
I love it
with what you're doing, and with so you mentioned your friend that kind of kicked all this off with you, and then your current team that you work with. What are some of the things that helped you, that made it easy for y'all to work together, and that we could help other people understand would work well?
I think personalities help. I just love my IT people. I do. I consider them friends. I have for a long time. And even those who have now no longer working with me, I consider them friends. Mm-hmm. And so that interpersonal relationship will always help. Let's start there. But I tell you, as we built out our IRP or incident response plan. We worked very closely together, and they welcomed the input. One of the things that I think is a struggle, and I know you didn't ask this question, but I'm going to go there.
That's why I have you here, Dena.
One of the things that's a struggle is actually sometimes a corporate hierarchy. What does the boss of the department think? A different question is, who is the boss of information security? That's a completely
And I actually
different
want
topic.
you to talk about your perspectives on that.
And I have different thoughts on that. But if you have someone that says, I don't want you to talk to legal, then you go into more of an interpersonal relationship, to be honest. Because if you don't know your lawyers now, if you have a breach incident, you're going to get to know your lawyers. And it's much better to know your lawyers, even if it's informal. You say hi in the break room. You give your information security person a book. That you have lunch every once in a while. These things, even if it's an interpersonal relationship. So when the breach hits the fan, so to speak,
I like that.
then you're able to work together in a better way because you have a better understanding of each other. So I think that is important. Now, when you have the ability to work with someone in information security where there's no hierarchical issue of reaching out and talking, then it's easy to then talk about all the things.
Yeah.
I will tell you, they know so much. My information security team, they know so much about so many things. They know all of the threats. They know all of the things that may be coming. They're interesting. This is fascinating stuff. Security of what is the next stage of security. And then we'll have debates, and I love it. I love working with them when we're working on the policies and procedures, when we're setting up, when we have an outside consultant come in, and I'm working with my team, and they know that if there's something that's really sensitive, to make sure that we work together, because that attorney-client privilege can be your friend. But to get an attorney-client privilege, and this maybe your information security folks don't know as well, you can't just copy your lawyer, it turns out. Your lawyer has to actually do something and work with you, right? Yeah. And so that is a protection, to your point, for the organization of both teams.
Yeah, it really is. And, I get a lot of questions from CISOs that'll reach out to me directly because they don't have experience, teams sometimes to go to, and they're scared to ask certain questions of their in-house counsel. Oh. And I tell them, look, first, this is the problem. You got to build that relationship with your in-house counsel, because I can tell you my general thoughts on the law and the issues, and that goes to the point you made earlier. Cybersecurity is 100% a legal issue these days. We have international, federal, state regulations. In Texas, we just had our comprehensive Texas privacy law come online on July 1st. But all of those things pale in comparison to something you deal with every day, and that's contracts. Yeah. Every contract you see today has something addressing protecting intellectual property or data protection or notification of a breach. And the challenge is there is, in my world as a breach quarterback, many times, a breach means one thing to me. In the world of many legal departments, a breach means a contractual breach. Mm-hmm. You talk to a security person, they may be thinking incident response. Well, we do that all day when we get people banging away at our network and we stop them. But when we're talking about real incident response, where you need to involve your legal, that's not your routine thing. That's a much different issue.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I see as breach as all of that, to be honest, and I always have. But even when you bring up a contract, I think, oh yeah, we worked very, very closely with our information security team to do our InfoSec addendum. Yeah. So anytime any contract that relates to a vendor or a consultant that can connect with our system at all, that we have an information security addendum, and sometimes we have the robust version, and sometimes we have the lesser version depending on the risk.
Yeah.
And that is 100% working with our information security team. And I may be really fortunate on that, to be honest. Like, we have really such a great relationship and easy access to our information security team. Maybe others don't. Like, I can't even imagine.
But they should.
I know. I'm sitting here thinking about, like, I can't even imagine coming up with an information security addendum and not working with my information security team. They're the ones that tell us. Now, we have some things that we have as well, and I'll just tell you what we've done, because I don't know if others do it, but, who knows? So we have 2 boxes to check on one of our procurement forms. One of them is internally of, will they connect with our system? One of them is externally for the vendor of, will you connect with our system? Because what we figured out was, you don't know.
Yeah.
Your internal people may not know if the vendor system is going to connect with our system, but that vendor should. And so that is our trigger to make sure that we put on an information security addendum. And then we work with our information security team to decide the short form or the long form, which is the way to go.
And that's so critical. And number one, I'm just enjoying the fact that we have your business behind us in the background right here, the North Tollway. We did that for you, Dena.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
But, there's so much of importance in that, because what we're talking about right now is third-party or supply chain risk management, which is one of those buzzwords that people read and they're like, oh my God, that's too much, I can't take that on. But you just described a big part of that.
I just had a moment.
Understanding how do we work with our third parties, and the fact that so much of this comes from our contract, and how we describe things like an incident or a breach or a triggering a notification event, or what our rights are following one of those events, is so critical. And I see information security people thinking they should own that. I see legal teams thinking they should just enter the contract because we're the lawyers. But the reality is, we have to bring both of our perspectives to bear. And
Absolutely.
I say that because I had a very large, potentially large breach. There was a potential breach event back sometime back that involved a network that where all the business partners relied on our processing for their work, to do their business, right? And they had a ransomware event in the environment, very small, very contained, but their precaution was to shut down the network, which meant then shutting down all the processing for the business partners. And those contracts became so critical at that point, not only for what are our obligations when we shut it down. We didn't have a data breach in any capacity under what people think data breach, but we did have to shut down our connection, and we had to start doing notifications. And the in-house legal department had weeks and months of work following up, because those third parties did not want to reconnect once we gave the all clear.
Oh,
for the reasons you're talking about.
Okay.
If someone's connecting their network to yours, that now puts your network at risk also.
I was thinking you were going a different direction. I was thinking that they were mad at you for shutting everything down. Because did you cause them not to be able to do business? Could they not bring in revenues? There's all sorts of things that could come out of a breach. But to your point,
they were not happy about that part either. But they did understand it, because they were all very sophisticated businesses. They had excellent IT and security teams, so they understood the rationale.
Yeah.
But what they said after the fact is, well, just because you tell us you're safe doesn't mean we believe you're safe.
I will tell you, I think my information security team would say the same thing. I really do. Like, how do I know? Do I take your word for it? This happened on your watch.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I would imagine, I'm projecting here, but I would imagine my information security team would want a third-party assurance. But as you know, there's usually some type of consultants and forensics and things like that. And if you've got a reputable forensics entity consultant that's helping you, I again, projecting out, I would think the businesses would accept
And
that.
that's exactly what we did.
There
We
you
had
go.
a third-party digital forensics
Yeah.
incident response firm that came in, investigated the event, and then gave the all clear. But then we had to have meetings, right? We had to have meetings to convey the findings, which were conducted under privilege and required NDAs, and which goes back to our contracts.
Very
you know?
complicated.
And so for anyone to think that security doesn't involve legal, I mean, these are very important roles. But something you mentioned earlier I want to go back to, because I was at an event, I was one of the speakers at a board of directors event earlier this week, and one of the topics was conveying information to the board. And you mentioned about board reporting. How do you see that operate, and what are your thoughts on that? Like of cyber risk and maybe incidents or whatnot?
So let me say that I like what we do. I think it's been well thought out, and it has developed over the years. So as I mentioned, I've been at NTTA for almost 10 years, and it has gotten more and more to board level in terms of what the board is interested in. And the board is very aware of cyber risk. Let me be very clear. If there's anyone listening that has not brought cyber as a risk to the board level, they should, because those board members, they know and they understand the risk. They may not understand the technology as much, but they do understand the risk. So we have quarterly updates to our board where the IT team, and I say IT because it's more general, it's our information security team as well as other things related to IT. They go quarterly to our board. I know some boards
So they're
meet
talking to them
quarterly. Directly.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So we've in executive session, because you don't want the bad guys to know anything about your security. Let's be honest here.
No, for sure.
But quarterly they go and talk, and occasionally our vendor comes and talks. So the vendor that helps with our security, as well as if we had a breach incident, would do forensics on the internal side as opposed to the external side. That they come in and talk to the board directly. We did a tabletop with our board. Can you believe that? We did a tabletop.
I can.
Yeah.
That was one of the topics that came up this week in that presentation was do you involve the board in the tabletop? And I think there's a role, right? My view, I don't want them too active. I'd rather them watching, maybe with a no-speak rule, because the minute a board member says something, everybody else is kind of like, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I agree. That happens sometimes.
Let me give you a different perspective. We needed to know, as a staff, what did the board want if we had an event.
That is
More importantly than almost anything else. Because you're right, if a board member speaks, it's important. And we
Yeah.
take what our board members say very seriously, as do all staffs of every company everywhere.
Yeah.
But we needed to show them, first of all, that this is what a potential breach situation would look like. These are the people involved. You've got your legal, you've got your information security, you've got your public affairs. You've got
absolutely.
all these folks that are at the table, and this is what we're working on, and this is what we're thinking about at the time. So we are live going through a scenario when we get the injects for each time and each day, telling the board, this is what we would do, and this is how. Board, this is when we would talk to you. Does that make sense to you?
I love that.
And who on the board? Do you talk to the
And
chairperson?
How does it?
How? Well, all of these things, but the how is, as you know, depends on what situation
Yeah,
we're talking
exactly,
about. Yeah. So it's all very interesting of what do you do and how and when, and so we were as transparent as we could be with a hypothetical situation of this is what we would plan to do if this were happening for real.
Yeah, and I think that is so critical because, again, like everything else in both legal and security, we use these terms like tabletop exercises. And it sounds so intriguing, right? Like if I want to go to a cocktail party and sound important, tabletop exercises, right?
Pro tip, don't.
Maybe it doesn't sound right. But we're talking about practice.
Yeah.
We're practicing,
Yeah.
we're training and learning and having that back and forth of, hey, what are you going to want to know? How are we going to do that? To me, there's a great quote on incident response. It's not really, but I've made it one on incident response by General Omar Bradley. And it says, Amateurs talk strategy and tactics. Professionals study logistics. And when we're talking about incident response, like the real critical kind, it's all about those logistics of who do I need to have involved? How do I get them involved? How do I communicate with them? And what you're describing there, to me, is like a model of how I think at least one tabletop should go, right? That doesn't mean you won't have different kind that maybe you spin up on a WebEx and say, hey, let's practice this or let's practice that.
I will tell you, I talked about the board tabletop that we had earlier this year, but we will have another with executive team down as well.
Yeah.
And I know our tech team does separate tabletops. We have multiple tabletops a year because, again, it's practice.
It's practice.
Because the more you practice, the better you understand, the better you know who to talk to when. The when is important.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the when is so interesting because there's such different ideas.
Yeah.
So you've got your insurance folks. They want that when to be right away. There's anything that's going wrong, you have to tell me. Do you? The IT team doesn't even know it's a thing yet.
They don't know it's a thing.
Yes, they got to know it's a thing before they should ever tell anybody.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you've got a sky is falling situation. You absolutely want to deal with the real situations that you're dealing with. There's no question about that. And if you have an inkling that something is real, whatever it is, you have, the bad guys coming to get you, and you think they may have done something in your system or not. That might be important enough to start having a conversation, at least with your lawyer.
Yeah.
Why do I say that? And I say this for our information security friends. We have things that we have to do too. Yeah. So if you get the idea that there's something going on, we need to get our breach coaches ready. Those are law firms. And start getting ready for what we need to do. We need to have a little bit understanding. Are we talking about everybody? Are we talking about a little bit? Which states are we talking about? Are we talking about our customers in all 50 states? Is it international? Is it just in Texas? Like, what are we looking at? What are we talking about? And so that's why I would say, give a little friendly, hey, heads up, something may be coming to your lawyer if you really genuinely think it's real. Yeah. But when do you tell your insurance? When do you tell your public affairs? When do you tell, when do you go up the chain? Like, how far do you go up the chain and when? I will tell you, we tend to be transparent. Yeah. And we tend to make sure that people know, and often, at least on notice that you have to give for cyber insurance, we tend to follow what a good friend of mine and yours, Carol Price, what she has said is you don't usually get in trouble on the cyber insurance side for letting him know something might be happening.
Like a notice of circumstances.
Correct. Now, this is different. Mileage may vary when you report to your insurance about your car wreck, because I do think they hold that against you.
I think so also.
But on a breach situation, make sure you talk to your broker and things like that. But we do tend to be transparent, which means across the board. Yeah. That means with our broker related to cyber insurance, with our public affairs, with our board, or at a minimum, our chairperson.
Yeah. Yeah, and with what they know. And Dena, there's so much more we could talk about.
Oh my gosh, so much.
And
are we out of
unfortunately,
time?
we're running up on time.
Goodness.
But I know we're going to have the whole rest of our topics to talk about another time when I can have you back here to join me.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for having me.
Well,
this is so much fun.
This is wonderful. And thank you for sharing your insights and your perspectives, because that's really what this is all about. Is, people hear from me a lot at different places, but I'm not the expert on these things. You are. People like you in your role are. And it's important for the security community and the legal community to have ideas of what other people are doing, because it's not always obvious. And so thank you very much for joining me. And I want to give you, I know you have a copy of the other book, the softback version, but we got a couple of those with the order, and
signed, y'all.
And it means a lot to me that you were here and helped with everything we've done.
No, so thank you. I love this. This is fantastic. Thank you for doing this.
You're very welcome. So with that, we will wrap up, and thank you all for watching and being a part of the very first episode of the GC+CISO Connection Show, and I hope you join us next time.